family of tech tycoon Mike Lynch and his 18-year-old daughter Hannah are devastated and in shock after their bodies were recovered following the sinking of a luxury yacht in Sicily. And that's according to a spokesperson. This comes as a manslaughter investigation has been launched by the Italian authorities to find out exactly why the luxury yacht capsized on Monday. Well, joining us now is our home and security editor, Mark White. Mark, the grim discovery of the final body, the news that the families no doubt were dreading and yet expecting, and now it seems to be moving on apace. Manslaughter cases, even potential cases for lawsuits. Could the super yacht turn into a super-sized lawsuit to try and find out exactly how and who what was responsible, why this happened?
Well, certainly it has the potential to get pretty messy in terms of the legal ramifications of what might come next. But I think immediately, as far as the Lynch family is concerned, there will be, of course, enormous sadness and grief at the realisation that Hannah Lynch has now been recovered, that her body has been recovered. But I think some relief as well, because the very last thing they would have wanted would have been for the search to have ended without any trace of this young woman's body and for them to never know. So small comfort, yes, but at least her body has been recovered from inside the yacht, as all those who perished were also inside this yacht. It seems they had no time at all really to try to escape, as this yacht was caught in that ferocious storm on Monday morning, tipped over and very quickly sank. And yes, you're right there. The investigators from the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, the UK body, because this was a British flagged vessel, in tandem with Italian prosecutors, because of course there is loss of life on Italian soil, will want to know exactly what happened here and if there is any blame and who to apportion that blame to. Now, there are obvious questions for the skipper of this vessel, James Cutfield, to answer about what steps were taken to man this ship. There were 10 crew members on board. It was well staffed in terms of the 12 passengers. They had 10 crew members. So one key question is, was there anyone on duty in the bridge? With 10 crew members, you would hope that they would be able to have a 24-hour manning system on this yacht, able to look out for any freak abnormalities like a sudden downturn in the weather. And if so, what mitigation did that person on the bridge, or even if there was no one on the bridge, what mitigation did the crew take when this storm began to strike, to alert other passengers on board the vessel, try to get the vessel turned into the wind, anything like that. If that didn't happen and didn't happen in a timely manner, then it could be very costly indeed, not necessarily in monetary terms, but in terms of a criminal sanction against the skipper and other crew members.
And there's going to be a huge recovery cost, we learned today, Mark, from the Italian Coast Guard, 15 million euros and an 8-week meticulous job to try and get the Bayesian off the seabed and up to the surface, and somebody will be liable for that bill. And this 16-minute window, potentially the crew could have alerted. There could have been an avoidance strategy. The ship's manufacturer claiming that the Bayesian was unsinkable. Its design was designed not to go down. Mark White, so many questions will be following in the wake of this terrible, terrible tragedy.
Yes, I mean, in terms of the vessel's owners, the Italian Sea Group, their CEO, whose name is Giovanni Constantino, has been talking. He described the vessel as unsinkable. I mean, clearly blatant nonsense. Of course, it was sinkable, and indeed it did sink and has ended up in 50 metres of water. But he wants, for obvious reasons, to apportion any blame, if blame should be apportioned, to human error and not to the manufacturers of the vessel. He claims that the vessel was sound, that if all of the proper procedures had been followed, then there would have been no issue. The crew should have been, according to Giovanni Constantino, been able to steer that vessel into the wind, as indeed another boat that was just anchored nearby the Bayesian at the time that this storm struck. The captain of that vessel was able to start the engines and steer his vessel into the wind, as you should do, of course, to help ride out the storm. So, of course, the key question is why the crew of the Bayesian was not able to do the same, or if they did, why that was not a successful outcome. So it's a lot of questions that the Marine Accident Investigation Branch investigators will have to try to answer, along with those prosecutors, Martin. And yes, a very expensive job if they do go down the road of raising this vessel, and it's probably the vessel's insurers that would have to foot the cost of any recovery operation.
And Mark White, as you say, amidst all of this, 18-year-old Hannah, who just got her A-level results last week, was due to start Oxford University studying English. There'll be some small mercy that her body has been recovered at least. Mark White, thank you very much for joining us and bringing us up to speed. Now, joining us to discuss this and just dissect it further is the maritime investigation expert, James Wilkes. James, welcome to the show. You may have overheard that previous conversation. I've got a lot of questions I'd like to ask you in terms of what now, no doubt, will be a meticulous and painstaking investigation, perhaps even a lawsuit. And we heard their manslaughter charges riding so many theories and allegations, but the 16-minute window claims that the hull was partially raised. Would that have been ample time to have done something about the impending weather conditions? And is that a line of investigation that no doubt will be looked at as to what happened and who was culpable?
Everything will be investigated by the MAIB, sorry. Every line of inquiry will be scrutinised. Of course there will. I think it's natural for people to speculate. It's natural for people to make allegations at the moment. But if they're not on the inside of the investigation, then it is just speculation, and it is incredibly premature to start arriving at unfounded conclusions at this stage. If there was 16 minutes, then the MAIB and the criminal prosecutors from the Sicilian prosecutor's office will be looking into those 16 minutes and what happened in those 16 minutes. None of us can put ourselves on the yacht at the time and know reasonably what we would have done in those circumstances. So it's very easy to judge from an armchair. But at the end of the day, this was a very violent, quick incident, a weather incident that affected the Bayesian more than it did the Sir Robert Baden-Powell, which was moored not far away, but apparently far enough away not to be affected by the water spout that people claim hit the vessel. And so we have to be cautious, very cautious, of drawing premature conclusions that are not founded in evidence.
It's not to draw a premature conclusion, though, to underline the fact that the prosecutor's office of the area is making inquiries into a manslaughter investigation. A manslaughter investigation involves apportioning blame, apportioning culpability. So that is a very, very real thing. And these are questions that will be asked. But in more general terms, in a situation like this, James, who's responsible in terms of is the craft insured? Is the captain insured? What's the financial backbone for any claim that may be made by an authority or an individual? How does that work?
So a yacht of this nature will have two principal forms of insurance. The first is hull, marine hull insurance, that insures the physical yacht itself for damage and for casualties of this nature. There is also third-party liability insurance often called protection and indemnity, but that is for third-party claims made against the yacht's owner, made against the vessel, made against the managers. They can hold that insurance themselves. The yachtmaster may have professional indemnity insurance, may have public liability insurance of his own volition, and the yacht managers will also have their own various forms of insurance that might respond in an incident such as this.
So, for example, James, we're hearing here this €15 million raising the craft off the seabed, the 8-week procedure, and the port authority, the Coast Guard there. In that instance, they'd be recovering that money from the insurers. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes. I mean, Nick Sloan, who is the salvage master on the Costa Concordia, has put that number out there, 15 million. I know Nick, I trust him. I'd said, if he said it's going to be around that number, I'm sure it is. Where that financial liability ultimately rests will be down to possibly legal advice. It may be shared between insurers and the coastal state, which will be Italy, because it will depend on the reason why the Bayesian is going to be salvaged. If it's going to be purely salvaged for the purposes of investigation, well, that's one thing. If it's going to be salvaged because they're looking to recover the vessel and then reinstitute it as what we call a constructive total loss rather than an actual total loss, an unrecoverable hull, then some of that will possibly fall on the hull insurers in due course. But that will be a decision made in the distance. It's at the moment, the investigators will be working out what they need to do to get to the evidence that they need to see, the information, the facts that they need to uncover so that they can arrive at their conclusions. And it's very important to point out the Marine Accident and Investigation Branch will not be apportioning blame. That's not their job. Their job is to look at the causes of the sinking and the contributory factors. And there may be human factors involved. There may have been, things that the crew could have done. In hindsight, though, we are making this investigation. We're always looking back on an investigation of this nature. So the MAIB will not be apportioning blame. That will fall if they want to bring a criminal prosecution to the Sicilian prosecutor's office.
And James, may I ask you briefly, if I could, how long's a piece of string? But there are an incredible number of moving parts in an investigation like this, the weather reports, everything about it. How long could we be looking at before we get any kind of conclusion? Months, weeks, a year?
Well, it's going to be months, because it's going to take 8 weeks to salvage the hull from the bottom and try and keep it in one piece as they lift it. They want to preserve as much evidence as possible. You know, we are talking at 8 weeks as a very minimum before they get to the hull itself. I should imagine they'll be surveying the hull over the next week or so using remote operating vehicles. And I should imagine then that the investigators will come back to the UK, will be looking at data that they don't need to examine while they're on scene. And it will probably be the rest of this year that they will be bringing that investigation to a conclusion.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us. James Wilkes, Maritime Investigations Expert. Thank you very much.